He thought the extraterrestrial pirate girls would rob him, but they had other lustful plans for him. Captain Jason Knowles leaned against the Orion Huntress, clutched his bloodied side claxons as the bulkhead of his crippled starship blazed in crimson. He had put up a tremendous fight, and when the emergency leaf flashed, it illuminated the bridge's broken viewports and sparking control consoles of battle. But the Marauder's relentless attack had eroded his defenses. Leaving his meager crew dispersed, that IT was just a question of time until the pirates boarded and completed the task across the decks below, dead or dying. Heavy footsteps reverberated through the ship as it lurched as the umbilical tunnel latched onto its hull with a mechanical groan. Jason clenched his teeth and brandished his plasma pistol in the hallway, willing to fight to the death. But as the smoke cleared, he discovered that he was looking down the barrels of a dozen laser weapons, all of which were being held by the most breathtakingly gorgeous. The women he had seen were humanoid and had athletic bodies, yet under their worn leather spacesuits. Their skin was a striking emerald green with plenty of cleavage. Heaved with the lead pirate, with a wild mane and a sneer on her large violet lips, came forward with effort and adrenaline, dot of molten gold eyes and flaming red hair. "Well, what do we have here?" The woman smiled as Jason, a tiny fly trapped in our web, gently lowered his weapon, took whatever she wanted, and left it. "Oh, we want to let her gaze roam over his powerful body with a seductive, smoky voice. "Thank you very much, handsome." Before Jason could respond, two of the pirate women sprang forward, pulled the plasma pistol from his grasp, and twisted his body to get him to stand. He gasped in agony as his wound burned, sending stars shooting across his vision with his arms behind his back. "I'm not." As they pulled him in the direction of the umbilical, he muttered, "I'm just a retired fleet swar, no one." The redhead touched electrifying and stroked a finger up his sharp jawline, saying, "I'll pay to get me back. Anything about ransom. We have other things planned for you." As she touched her, Jason had an unwanted erection. The intoxicating aroma of exotic spices and musk filled his nose as the lush curves against him. What the devil did these insane? He was dragged across the umbilical by the pirates and into their ship, a sleek corsair brimming with illegal military-grade weapons. Jason was still stumbling along, but he couldn't help but admire the cutting-edge technology. They carried him, bleeding, to what looked to be the captain's stateroom, where they pushed him to his knees on the luxurious carpet as sensual art covered the walls. Captain Kalisha, one of the women, was married to odd alien plants with suggestive forms in the corners that stated, "We brought you a prize." So Jason looked up to watch a velvet voice purr. See a scene from his most fantastic dreams, in which the pirate queen sat on a she had flawless jade skin and was wearing skin-tight black leather that left little room for imagination. Unlike her crew, she had a pair of tiny vampire fangs sticking out of her eyes and high cheekbones. Captain Kalisha rose from her mouth, giving her a delectably sinister appearance, to her chair and walked hypnotically across her hips, grabbing a handful of Jason's hair and yanking as the girls have definitely excelled themselves this time, she remarked, forcing him to look into her burning eyes with his head back, that appreciatively following the firm lines of his chest, a magnificent example of human masculinity. "How did a large, powerful soldier like you allow yourself to be captured?" Jason gave her a fierce glance. Kalisha flung back her head and chuckled. "Don't let anything happen. Your goon has gotten a few lucky shots. He has spirit. Therefore, she wanted her team to tend to his wounds, and I like this one that I believe I'll take my victory spoils tonight. Therefore, bring him to my quarters." The pirate women laughed and hauled as the door closed behind them. Jason was pulled to his feet once again and gave one final look before leaving the stateroom. Jason's brain swam as the gaze of Kalisha promised him wonderful punishments and sinful delights. Women carried him along the ship's winding passageways, and even though the blood loss was beginning to take its toll, given the severity of his circumstances, he couldn't help but be amazed by his captors, almost otherworldly, beautied, ethereally seductive, and the way they kept inadvertently touching him. When they checked his restraints, their hands lingered a little too long, which was enough to make a guy crazy with forbidden. Was he doomed to die as the plaything of some sex-starved extraterrestrial vixens there, because of desire? Were undoubtedly worse options, but perhaps this was just a fever. IT felt much more likely that he had already bled out on his ship's floor in a dream than that he would actually be captured by the women, who were the sexiest pirates in the galaxy. Took him to a medbay that was surprisingly well equipped and took off his as they washed and dressed his torn uniform. Jason attempted to ignore the warm looks and grateful muttering that wounds more gently than he would have thought. So he said, "Why are you bothering to patch me up?" One of them treated his slashed side with a stinging antiseptic. As I have mentioned, I'm a plump brunette with eyes like polished obsidian, who was worthless as a captive, grinned slyly at him. "Captain, Kishia likes her toys to be in perfect condition and has a rigorous no-damage goods policy." That condition Jason swallowed hard. "You're a person. Of course you are. You're not a damn toy." Suddenly, a warm, fuzzy tendril spread through his veins as the woman said injected him with a painkiller. That really kind guy at that point. "So unwind and let the medication take effect. You'll need your strength for tomorrow." Jason fell into a vague semi-slumber, his thoughts racing with irrational theories about what exactly caused this. Why had the Kalisha woman seemed so determined to take him for herself? And what did she have in store for him? He became entangled with space. During his years in the fleet, he had encountered pirates before, but none were quite like these. The women on board radiated a raw, primal, unavoidable sensuality, called to something deep and old within him that he believed he had long yearned for. Jason felt he should be planning his escape since he was buried, looking for a means to reverse his captor's situation, and as the drugs dragged him down into velvety darkness, all he could think was, get the hell off this flying bordello. He had a hunch that one was Kia because of the seductive sensation of her hands on his skin and the evil promise in her eyes that in any case, Jason would never forget this night. He woke up with for an instant. He was unable to recall where he was or how, his heart thumping at his ribs like a caged animal. After he arrived, everything happened quickly, including the attack on his ship by the stunning pirate women and their leader, sensual assurance of an enjoyable evening. He sat upright on the slender bunk, squirming as the movement caused the recently wrapped wounds to pull, and the med bay was suddenly empty. The pirate seemed certain that he was in no condition to bother any more idiots who were disregarding the pain that still aches in as the room was small. But Jason stood up and swung his legs over the edge of the bed to survey his surroundings that fully furnished with banks of advanced diagnostic equipment, dazzling chrome cabinets, and a single door allowed beyond. In the hallway, Jason patted the door and, not astonished to have it locked, he ran his fingers along the seam in an attempt to find a weak spot, but the portal was sturdy and made to support the rigors of space travel, and his kidnappers had taken care to remove the instruments he would need to pry it open. Jason, agitated by anything that could be used as a weapon, turned back to the room and looked at a supply cabinet, but he searched through the stuff in the corner, hoping to discover something he could turn into improvised lockpick. But the pirates had been meticulous in their planning, so all he had were bandages, and Jason was discussing the wisdom of using a septic in a few bottles of unlabeled medication. When he heard the distinct hiss of the door mechanism disengaging, he considered injecting himself with an unidentified substance. The door slid open as he spun around, grabbed a scalpel from a nearby tray, and held it behind his back. The red-headed pirate, who had touched him for the first time during boarding, entered the room with her tray perched on one hip while her amber eyes glitter wickedly. "That I brought you some breakfast since I thought you'd need the energy," and she purred as she put the tray down on the counter. Jason attempted a grin as he approached the woman, who was extremely considerate of you, for your special night with the captain. She smiled back at him, keeping her gaze fixed on him as she opened the tray to show a steaming bowl of after eating some sort of porridge, a piece of brown bread, and a cup of coffee-smelling liquid. Kishia doesn't like to Jason, who was kept waiting, picked up the bowl and cautiously smelled its scent. It was savory and rich, with a tinge of strange spices that made his stomach growl. He hesitated even after being reminded that he hadn't eaten anything since long before his ship was attacked. The woman made a silky, seductive sound as she chuckled. "How do I know you haven't drugged this? If we intended to drug you, we would have completed it while you were unconscious. This is merely a small act to maintain your strength since you will need it." Jason experienced a rise in body temperature behind his collar as a result of the woman's provocative wink. She seemed to want to eat him whole, which was frightening, thrilling, and risky. Jason took a careful spoonful of the porridge while keeping a close watch on his captain. The rich flavor of the food burst on his tongue that he tucked in with gusto, finding it complex and unlike anything he had ever tasted. Suddenly hungry while eating, the redhead showered him with gratitude, the eyes sweeping up his exposed chest and resting on the alluring trail of dark hair that vanished beneath the Jason's skin, poked Ling with bandages around his waist. And he felt himself stretching unconsciously under her inspection, that consciousness. What the devil was wrong with him? He was a prisoner on a pirate ship, and a woman was serving him strange slots who just hours earlier had a gun to his head. Instead of praying like that, he ought to be trying to find a method to subdue her and get away. The way she gazed at him, with the hunger in her eyes, made it seem like a peacock during mating season. That it was hard to think logically, because no one had so obviously wanted him in a long time. And damn if it wasn't doing odd sensations inside his body. Jason licked his lips as he completed the food and put the empty bowl aside, her own mouth twisting into a smile that promised all kinds of evil. Her gaze followed the action of his tongue. When she finished the delights, she remarked in a husky voice, "Good time to get you ready for the captain," and grabbed for his arm. But the woman's eyes opened in surprise and then narrowed as Jason moved back out of reach and brought the scalpel up between them. That it appears that our young soldier lad has anything like respect. Jason brandished the scalpel, his heart thumping against his ribs, but he still had some fight left. "I'm not going to." The redhead tilted her head, examining him with a look that said, "Anywhere with you. I'm getting off this ship one way or another." With a mix of respect and laughter, "You genuinely believe that you can defeat a whole group of armed pirates in your but, my love." You can hardly bear that she wasn't at fault for Jason's injuries that throbbed with each breath. And when he moved too fast, his vision swam frighteningly, yet he wouldn't dare let like a lamb being slaughtered. This space siren led him docilely to her captain's bed. "I'll take my chances," he said today as she approached the door. The woman shrugged, unconcerned. "Come as you are, but keep in mind that Kalisha always gets what she believes, that if you don't fight it, it would be simpler for you in the end." Jason lunged for the door in an attempt to surprise the pirate, but she was quicker than he thought, turning away from him with Jason staggered past Cradle Grace as the scalpel cut through the void. The momentum is pushing him into the hallway, past the blaring alarms and the sound of racing feet coming from both sides as Jason stumbled down the corridor, desperately looking for an escape route, because the ship was a maze. There were winding hallways and sealed hatches that made it difficult to tell which way to go to the escape pods or hangar BAY. As Jason turned a corner, he saw three astonished pirate ladies, their hands rushing to their weapons, that he rushed into them like a charging bull, scattering the women at their hips before they could draw. He could hear their cries of astonishment as yelps gave Jason a valuable few seconds to put some distance between them, that a hatch opened and others as he rushed, his bare feet slamming against the chilly metal surface in pursuit behind him. These were armed and prepared for battle as the pirates spilled out and the laser blast sizzled. Jason was insane. He was one of those people who dove for protection behind a bulkhead with his heart in his throat. What had the wounded, unarmed man been thinking when he faced a whole ship full of seductive, lethal warriors attempting to flee in this manner? But it was unthinkable to give himself up to Kish's tender mercies. Jason was aware that he might never leave the captain's quarters again, at least not in the same form, but he had to find a way out of this horrible ship, even if it meant dying, because it was better to die on his feet than to live. That ASA game for some sex-crazy space pirates who clutched the scalpel like Jason, a talisman. Inhaled deeply before getting ready to make his last stand laser. Jason recoiled as the blast charred the bulkhead over his head, filling the air with the pungent smell of molten metal. His thoughts were racing as he pressed tighter against the scant cover, realizing that there was nowhere left to go or fight. Jason closed his eyes and realized that he was indeed trapped against the pirate crew's superior numbers and firepower. This was it, the last line he had ever heard, and he was trying to slow his breathing to the dangers when he enlisted in the space fleet years ago, knowing that each mission might be his last. But in some way, he never thought his narrative would finish this way. Stranded and alone on an enemy ship, only waiting to be taken back by a group of stunning green-skinned extraterrestrials. The cosmos undoubtedly has a perverse sense of humor. This voice sounds familiar, that I want him alive and uninjured, burst out, slicing through the confusion like a razor. There was a ringing silence as the laser fire suddenly stopped, and when Jason opened his eyes, he saw Captain Kalisha walking. Her crew split as she walked down the hallway toward him, her black leather bodysuit hugging every curve like a second skin. Kalisha stopped a few feet from Jason's hiding place as she passed, their guns falling before her like water. Put her hands on her hips and grin at her beautiful lips. The game is over, soldier boy. You can now come out that I'm not going anywhere with you. Kalisha threw back her, and Jason remained where he was, his hands clenching on the scalpel that head and chuckled at the throaty, deep sound. Oh, I adore a man with spirit. Except truly, sweetheart. What did you anticipate happening that you would struggle to leave my ship with nothing except as she shook her head, her eyes sparkling with laughter, and displayed a bit of sharp metal and utter boldness. I respect your bravery, but even you have to realize how stupid this is. You are outnumbered, outgunned, and not fit for a protracted conflict. Come out now, and I assure you that nothing bad will happen to you. Jason wavered between wanting to resist and the understanding that she was correct. He was not fit to fight, even if he had no idea how to pilot their ship or where he would travel, whether he liked it or not, in order to overwhelm Kalisha and her crew. Jason cautiously lowered the scalpel and emerged from behind the bulkhead, his hands raised in surrender. Out of mercy, Dakisa's smile expanded as she glanced up and down at him, her eyes lingering on the bandages that were crisscrossing. His chest and IT wasn't that difficult, was it? She pointed to two of her crew members who went forward to make sure Jason was comfortable, surround him on each side, and accompany our guest to my quarters. That Jason's arms were grabbed by the pirates as they quickly debriefed him. They let them guide him away. Feeling Kish's eyes pierce his back with each step, forceful but not painful. His heart thumping against his ribs, his skin tingling with a mix of anticipation and fear. What was in store for him by the Pirate Queen, and why? Did a part of him get excited at the thought while the others screamed in fearfully? The women led Jason to a spacious, lavishly furnished room close to the ship's back, with luxurious carpets covered in the walls and floor were decorated with elaborate tapestries that showed scenes of bizarre, sensual landscapes that animals. A huge bed filled with fur blankets and silk cushions took up the sea of the room. Jason gulped hard as the pirates let his mind run wild, conjuring up all kinds of gory images to situations when Kalisha would just use him for herself and get what she wanted from him. Did she have something more sinister in mind? Or did she enjoy him before throwing him away like a dead battery? The potential of brainwashing or control to make him her willing slave, even while a tiny, obstinate part of him raged against the notion of surrendering to anyone. His mind spun and his blood heated. Jason turned to watch Kalisha enter the room with a predatory glare. Despite how seductive she was, the door hissed open behind him, in her dark gaze. She waved her hand away from the other pirates, leaving her and Jason alone. It seems like it's just you and me now. Handsome, but he purred and stalked towards him with the elegance of a hunting cat. What should we do to kill time? While Jason retreated till his calves struck the bed's edge, his throat, and his heart. Despite his trembling voice, he managed to say, I won't be your plaything. I don't care what you do to me. I won't surrender to his defiance. Just made Kalisha's smile bigger, and she drew closer until her body was only a hair's breadth apart. Oh, my darling baby. Her heat was burning him through their clothes. I don't want a mindless drone in my bed, she said, sliding a finger down his chest. Who said anything about submission? I'm looking for a guy who will give as much as he receives, who will share my desire for passion, and who will leave us both exhausted. And her hand moved downward, skimming over the bandages at his waist, satisfied. Despite his best attempts to resist, Jason's body responded to her touch, and I could feel how much he groaned. There's no shame in it, Jason. You want this, Kalisha said, her breath hot against his ear. Denying our baser wants would be denying our basic nature as beings of flesh and blood. She totally forced herself on him, claiming his mouth in a burning manner while her breasts crushed against his chest. For a minute, Jason's thoughts resisted the surge of sensation, making him tense. Then Kalisha's tongue swept. She tasted like sin, and he felt himself opening to her with a stifled gasp as she demanded admission across his lower lips. He returned. Jason's hands reached up to hold on her hips, revealing a dark and seductive spice. Kalisha hummed in response to the passionate kiss, all resistant ideas escaping in the face of her talent and passion. And as she angled his head to intensify the kiss, Jason felt himself sinking into. Her fingers tangled in his hair. Nothing else mattered, as she was engrossed in the taste, smell, and feel of her. There was just this, not his objective, not his wounds, not even his own freedom. Kalisha finally broke the kiss between her and the fire she stoked in his blood. She smiled at Jason, her eyes dark and full of promise, leaving them both hot and yearning. "She still wanted to fight me, soldier boy," she said in a husky voice. "Or are you prepared to give in to what Jason meant?" He knew he was lost when he saw her look into his own dark, desire-filled eyes. He would gladly give Kishia his body, mind, and soul. Anything she asked for, or whatever she had planned, he rasped the words, "I surrender." Believing that everything was hers to take, Kishia's smile changed to a triumphant one as she shoved him back onto the bed and scurried past him to retrieve her treasure. Jason finally woke up slowly. For a minute, he just lay there enjoying the sensation of cold silk sheets. His body relaxed and heavy with contentment. Memories of the night before floated on his naked skin and the warm weight of Kishia's head on his chest. Green skin, scarlet hair, and breathy gasps flashed across his thoughts like pieces of a half-remembered dream. That I muttered, "Please," enjoying the sensation of Kishia's lips and the movement of her body heat. The exquisite pleasure that had grown, peaked, and left him broken in its aftermath had come up against has been amazing, mind-blowing. And unlike anything Jason had ever encountered, he had no idea that there were heights until Kalisha had led him there, wringing every last ounce of pleasure from his willing flesh before releasing him. And she repeated the process repeatedly until they were both exhausted and shaking, holding on to one another like survivors of a shipwreck in a storm-tossed sea. Jason had never felt so totally engrossed and controlled by someone else. It should have frightened him in the same manner. Although Kalisha had overcome his barriers and completely embraced him, he still felt the need for more. She made him feel alive with more of her touch, taste, and passion. That it was crazy how much she was loved and wanted even when in captivity. Instead of lying here in post-coital bliss, wondering about his captor and enemies, he ought to be planning his escape. Kalisha stirred against him the next time she took him to her bed. As she raised her head to look into his eyes, her silky hair tickled his chin, and her eyes were heavy and gentle. There was a tiny with a smile on her lips. She said, "Good morning," in a sultry voice. "Sleep well." Jason couldn't. He couldn't help but smile back at her, reaching up to caress her back in a way I haven't seen in years. That I can't say that I got a lot of real sleep. Although Kalisha laughed softly and throaty, I guess so. But I didn't either, as she stretched her body lazily. That you're an insatiable lover, rubbing against him in all the right places. That I think I might just keep you, Jason Knowles. Her words made Jason's heart stop. Pangs of uneasiness mixed with thrills of exhilaration kept him as what exactly the prisoner wanted, something more from Kalisha. But he wasn't sure what he wanted to beyond their shared sexual pleasure. But he realized he couldn't afford to become overly connected too soon, or Jason would eventually need to figure out how to get off the ship and return to his previous life. Wouldn't he? Putting thoughts aside, concentrate on Kishia's skin's warmth and her contentness. Instead, he whispered softly, running his fingertips down her back, "Eyes I live to serve." Kalisha smirked and playfully nipped at his, "But I'm not sure how much use I will be to you if you wear me out totally." "Jaw, I believe you still have a lot of stamina left, soldier boy, and I intend to use it very effectively." She kissed him, and Jason replied with a gentle yet firm kiss. His hands caressed her back and sides, mapping the dips and curves as he gladly lost himself in the taste and feel of her. It had gone so far the previous evening that Kalisha moaned in agreement and moved to straddle his hips. Breaking, "I could get used to waking up like this," she remarked, running, kissing him to sit up, and looking down at him with undisguised need. Jason's breath hitched at the sight of her hands on his chest. "Holding you in my bed, ready and willing to fulfill all of my desires." The deal you want his body to react naturally to her press on him, giving him a possessive edge to her words. Something flared in his harsh voice as he asked me to be your bed slave. Kishia's eyes were too fast for him to read anything she said, and her tone was light but tinged with seriously. "Though, I have more important things to take care of right now, so we can talk about the specifics later." Jason lost all sense of reason as she bent down to kiss him again, and he became engrossed in Kishia's enjoy the way her flesh slides against his and the fire that develops between them. After a passionate moment, Jason stroked Kish's hair as they lay tangled together, cooling. It's insane that he is absently admiring how silky it feels between his fingers. Kalisha raised her head and muttered, more to himself than to her, I shouldn't be feeling this way about you. Look at him. Her face is unreadable. Jason, how are you feeling? Stumbled when attempting to articulate the confusion of his feelings. Perplexed, I finally confessed, enthralled as though I were standing on a precipice. Ready to Kalisha fell into somewhere from which I can never return. She remained silent for a while, looking into his eyes, and then I see what you mean, she said, rolling off into sit against the headboard that whispered, this thing between us is so intense and overwhelming that it feels like nothing. Before she turned away, I've noticed that her profile was limed in the gentle light. Looking through the SH viewport, I'm a little afraid because I'm not used to wanting someone the way I want you. Why pursue her if, to be honest? Jason sat up too, reaching out to cup her cheek and turn her face back to his. Kalisha reached in to touch his eyes as he gently questioned, why take the risk? She mumbled, I can't seem to help myself, and fluttered closed for a time because of the moment I saw you. Still battling, battered and bleeding, I realized I had to face the consequences that I'm not sure what this is, but when she opened her eyes, Jason was astounded by their unadulterated vulnerability. All I know, Jason, is that I want you more than I've ever wanted anything else. I have no idea where this is heading or how it will end. Jason's heart tightened at her words, a surge of emotion coming up to the surface, and I'm prepared to risk everything to keep you to suffocate him because he didn't think he could talk, so he just leaned in and gave her a passionate kiss, expressing everything he couldn't. With equal zeal, Kalisha replied to the pressure of his lips against hers by putting her arms around Y's neck. They collapsed back onto the bed as she pressed the kiss. Further, lost in one another, and once again in the galaxy and all of its perils, forgotten for a little bit longer. But Jason understood that this reprieve was necessary even as he lost himself in Kish's embrace that was only temporary. Eventually, the outside world will return, forcing them to confront the pirate queens and her imprisoned opponents' actual identities and characteristics, two individuals on opposing sides of a galactic war who had no business falling in love but appeared. Defenseless Jason was aware that it was a formula for disaster to fight the pull of their own needs, but with Kalisha cozy, and he couldn't bring himself to care for the moment. But he was willing to hold her in his arms, taste her on his tongue, and smell her. He would give himself permission to act as though they were just a man and a woman for this brief while, with no titles or allegiances to rip them apart. The others could wait till Jason took the stage in front of the pirate crew tomorrow. Kalisha had summoned them to the ship's main deck, and they were trying not to falter under their collective gaze. Lounge, a spacious, open area with comfortable chairs and a fully stocked bar, is now she addressed her staff while standing next to him, one hand resting possessively on his shoulder. As everyone is aware, she started speaking in a voice that could readily be heard above the murmur of discussion. Our guest Jason Knowles has demonstrated that he was a really amusing addition to our small family, causing a chuckle, and the women in attendance exchanged grateful mutterings. And Jason felt his face heat up, though he wasn't really. He was at ease in his job as the ship's resident plaything. But he couldn't ignore the excitement he felt at the Kalisha grabbed his shoulder, calling his attention to the idea of being among these beautiful, dangerous creatures that returned the focus to her. But she went on. I've seen that some of you feel like you haven't had fair opportunity to spend more time with him. More whispers this time, with a hint of Jason looked around the room, dissatisfied, taking in a variety of lovely alien faces. Some of them appeared eager, while some were overtly hostile, while others were calculating. It appeared that his presence aboard the ship had sparked some rivalries. Thoughts of the crew's jealousies made him feel a peculiar mixture of thrill and anxiety. Kalisha held up that your captain. I must ensure everyone is happy to satisfaction of every crew member. Thus I've made the decision that Jason will be accessible to each of you to do as you choose, followed by a chorus of exclamations and ecstatic whispers that Jason's pulse pounded upon hearing this news, and his body reacted automatically to the notion of Kalisha glanced at him as he was being handed around like a favorite toy, her eyes glimmering with mischief and something worse than possessive of. Course, but this is completely up to you, Jason. And I would never make you do anything you. Jason didn't want to do it, but he knew he should, so he swallowed hard and his mouth went dry. refused to demand to be treated like a person instead of a plaything. But the idea of feeling the special each of these amazing women's charms and abilities were too alluring to ignore, and it wasn't like he had little control over the situation. Remained a prisoner on this ship, and was reliant on Kish's kindness to keep him safe, that comfort. Turning down her kind offer would only make things worse for him later on. And if he was to be really honest with himself, the thought of receiving so much love and attention from women was after serving in the space fleet for years alone. It was intoxicating to have the opportunity to lose himself in physical. It was nearly impossible to resist the pleasure and temporary distraction from the outside world. Jason nodded slowly as they met. Takisha's eyes widened as he said, gently, "I'm willing," with a mixture of resignation and expectation. She purred as she turned back to her crew, her eyes glimmering with pride and triumph. As soon as the game started, the women erupted in a sea of green flesh, cheering and around Jason. With his skin tingling and his heart racing, he grasped hands and allowed them to take him away. Jason lost himself in a flurry of sexual pleasures throughout the course of the following several days. Pleasures every pirate woman alternated with him, demonstrating to him the pinnacles of happiness in her own special manner. The ship's technician, Vala, enjoyed tying him up with silk and ropes and cruelly taunting him with her Reza, the weapons instructor, who liked to spar with him in the training chamber. And his cunning fingers and evil mouth Lashira, the navigator, would rather take him in the water before flinging him onto the mats and controlling him, that as she rode him to frightening heights. Observation dome the stars wheeled overhead, and Nessa, the ship's physician, insisted on giving him a comprehensive examination in the medical bay, using both clinical and every meeting was excruciatingly sensual, leaving Jason exhausted and content, with his mind blissfully empty and buzzing with pleasure. He surrendered to the feelings of allowing the women to do as they wanted with him and taking pleasure in their clear satisfaction of his willingness obedience. But even as Jason immersed himself in the sensual pleasures, he couldn't help but see the underlying themes of the women competed for his attention, causing crew conflict. There were sarcastic remarks and jealous glances as they tried to surpass the others in their lovemaking talent and inventiveness. It appeared that his president had disturbed the delicate balance of power on board by subtly vying for position, and Kalisha was at the core of the women's frantic efforts to establish their position in the new hierarchy. Despite keeping a detached and calculated eye on the proceedings, she frequently claimed Jason for herself, leaving no room for question that unclear to who had final say over him. But she appeared happy to let her staff have themselves as long as they. Jason couldn't help but wonder about her intentions, wondering if she was just using him as a tool to recall where they were in the end, to maintain order among her crew as a means of rewarding loyalty and punishing dissent, or was there anything else she was more interested in? He had no means of accessing the deeper feelings she skillfully concealed under her facade of alluring indifference, that knowing for sure. But as the days stretched into weeks, Jason started to lose the novelty of his circumstances, that discovered that he was becoming more and more attracted to the mysterious pirate queen. Their interactions had taken on a new level of when they were together. Kalisha showed feelings that went beyond simple sexual enjoyment. Letting her guard down just a bit, that Jason's heart ached because he saw brief, revealing flashes of vulnerability and longing. That it was stupid of him to show concern for her and think that there could be anything more than a captor and imprisoned. But he was powerless to stop Kalisha from getting under his skin and into his blood, that filled his mind and tormented his dreams until he could hardly recall a moment in which he had not been hers. It was the risky thing about this developing bond was that it left him open to jealousy and plots of the crew. They may view him as a traitor if they felt he was truly falling for their captain. Jason was unable to back down despite the fact that there was a threat of elimination rather than a reward to be given. Couldn't force him to harden his heart against the yearning tenderness in her and the alluring draw of Kish's touch. He was falling sincerely and really for her when she gazed at him in private moments, and he didn't know how to stop it. Alternatively, if he so desired, all he knew was that he was adrift in a sea of hazardous currents and competing allegiances, and the only thing sustaining him was the euphoric, terrifying, thrilling rush of being enmeshed in Kish's circle. No matter what Jason dug behind a tree to weather this storm, and hoped he came out on the other side with his heart and soul intact. The air above his head was blasted by laser blasts as his heart pounded. In his ears in the cargo hold, and no matter where you are, the area with the strong odor of ozone will emerge. Jason gritted his teeth when a sneering voice said, "You can't hide from me forever." Among all the pirate women she had, Joya was the ship's tactical officer, and he recognized her voice with his teeth had been the most overtly antagonistic toward him. Her eyes blazing with anger and resentment each time, she appeared to have taken matters in her own hands by ambushing him during his shift in the Jason's thoughts raced, attempting to think of a plan, when the cargo hold suddenly opened fire. He was unarmed, yet he was far from helpless. With his cunning, power, and military training, he would not die without a fight that had Jaya's blaster trained on him when she appeared at the end of the aisle. The conclusion of the day saw her eyes glinting with malice and her face twisted in a triumphant grin. "That I'm gonna love seeing you burn, pretty boy," she said, snarling her finger and pressing the trigger. But Jason was unwilling to give her the thrill. He charged at Jaya, dodging and swerving too. "Get clear of her," as Jason crossed the gap between them. His face set in a blaze. Jax's eyes widened in surprise. Determined, Grimace attempted to change her aim, but Jason pushed her to the ground too late. Knocking that they struggled on the ground, exchanging blows and swearing at Jaya as she released the blaster from her hand. It was quick and powerful, but Jason's bulk and unadulterated strength allowed him to pin her down his knee. Holding her hand above her head and slamming into her stomach, he hissed. Jaya fought beneath him, his eyes flaming with triumph and fury. She yelled, her eyes blazing with rage, "I'll never yield to you," as he snarled and spat like a cornered animal. "Kalisha will soon realize that you are nothing more than a diversion and a weakness." Jason simply grinned glumly. "Knows precisely who I am," he whispered, his voice low and menacing, "and she enjoys it." He tightened his hold on her wrists. "Even if you won't acknowledge it, she wants it just as much as you do." Jaya let out under him. She let out a wordless scream of rage while bucking and flailing, but she was genuinely trapped and unable to escape. Kalisha and the rest of the crew poured into the cargo hold just as Jason's iron grip tightened. They were lured to the noise of the chaos and slid to a stop, staring at the spectacle with wide eyes. Kisha looked directly at Jason, her face displaying a mixture of relief and astonishment, as well as something heated and eager. Jason realized how he must appear to her. His muscles strained as he gripped Yas, and it made his blood sing in his veins. His eyes were glimmering with wild, untamed energy, and his face was flushed from exertion to energy. He was the warrior, the predator, the alpha male, and by the manner, he could tell that Kalisha was staring at him, her lips opening in a quiet gasp as her eyes darkened with need that liked what she saw. "Stand down," Jaya Kalisha said in a chilly voice that tough as steel, but she kept her eyes on Jason. "It's over. You've lost." Jason held Jaya there for a while more until she went limp beneath him, all of her strength instantly gone. Before letting her go and getting up, he made sure to stand tall and proud in front of Kalisha and the crew. With his fists clenched at his sides and his chest heaving, he looked directly into Kisha's eyes, which were both challenging and inviting but a sly, wicked smile curled Kisha's lips as she expressed gratitude for his performance. She took a few swift steps to draw him across the distance between them, her control evident in every line of her body. Jason gave him a passionate, possessive kiss in return, and he did the same. That he felt the crew's eyes on them and could hear their arms encircling her and pressing her against his chest, that astonished and appreciative mutter. But he didn't give a damn. The woman in his arms and the fiery, blinding, and all-consuming fire that raged between them was his now and forever. And as the kiss came to a close, Kalisha pulled, returning her gaze to Jason, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of pride, relief, and intense. The crew burst into applause and whistles as they were surrounded by affection, their previous animosity forgotten in the face of their given the captain's obvious endorsement of Jason's behavior. Kalisha turned to face them, her smile belying her serious attitude. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," she added, teasing the corners of her mouth. "Jason is a valued member of this group, and not just a plaything or a prisoner," as her voice resounds with power. "Above all, he belongs to me, and anyone who threatens him is threatening me." Jaya, who appeared chastened and depressed as she went to the top, nodded and whispered their assent, understanding. Kalisha nodded her feet sharply in satisfaction before turning back to Jason. Her eyes grew softer as she observed his unkempt appearance and the remnants of his wildness in his eyes. Taking his hand in hers, she murmured softly, "Let's leave. I believe we need to talk about some things privately, Jason." Allowing her to guide him out of the cargo hold made his heart race with a mixture of comfort from adrenaline and expectation. He was aware that the last few minutes had permanently altered their relationship, and as Kalisha dragged him into her room and secured the door, and he was excited to investigate this new, dynamic pair, the emotional bond and physical fervor that had been developing between them since when they stepped into her ship. They merged in a kiss, their hands moving over each other's bodies, with Jason lost himself in the taste and feel of her, his senses overwhelmed by the urgent haste, overtaken by her mouth's smooth heat and her skin's enticing aroma. Kalisha laid her down when they eventually split up, both of them gasping for air and their eyes glassy with need. But Jason's heart ached as she gently traced the lines of his face with her fingers across his forehead. "That I love you, Jason," she said in a whisper, her voice brimming with emotion. "I didn't want to tell anyone, not even myself, that I loved you." That Jason's heart swelled with a joy so great that his breath held in his throat more than I ever imagined. That was nearly agonizing. "I love you too, Kalisha," he replied in a scratchy, shaky voice. "I've been feeling this way for a while." Kalisha smiled, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, but she wasn't sure how to tell you, or if you would even want to hear it. She said, "I want to hear it every day for the rest of our lives." She then gave him another lengthy, deep kiss out and full of promise. Jason kissed her back with all the passion and love in the world. When they eventually parted, his heart poured all of his devotion into the pressure of his lips against hers. They smiled, their eyes sparkled, and they knew they were in love that would not be simple. As Kalisha continued to lead a pirate ship with Jason was still a former soldier with a past and a future, and his obligations and responsibilities would always come. First, that were at best unclear, but they also understood that their combined strength was greater than their individual strength. Heart to heart, bound by a fierce and genuine love, they would confront the obstacles that lay ahead. Unbreakable, they lay on Kish's bed with their hearts pounding and their bodies intertwined. Jason knew that was in the arms of his pirate queen, his sweetheart, which was precisely where he was supposed to be, that his partner, and there is no other way he would prefer it.